Greetings again, traders. Today we are going to look at the fourth category of the institutional reference point, which is the fair value gap. Remember, I did mention that price is delivered by an artificial intelligence called IPTA that was founded and engineered by the founder of the smart money concept, Michael J. Huddleston. Now, he did mention that when IPTA is often in a rush to deliver price, remember IPTA has two basic functions. It is either running into areas of inefficient price delivery, or it is running for liquidity, buy side or sell side liquidity. Now, what are areas of inefficient price delivery? Areas of inefficient price delivery are those areas where price was not efficiently delivered into, okay, or delivered to. And a fair value gap is one of those institutional reference points referred to as an area of inefficient price delivery. Now, a fair value gap is simply a gap that is formed between three candlestick price action. Now, in a well-delivered price market, or in a well-delivered price action, we want to see three candlesticks like this being closed efficiently, okay, where the wick of this candle or the low of this candle trades into the body of this other candle. Just to mention, a traditional candle like this has an open over here for the red candle, it has a high which is the wick, it has a low which is still here, and then it has a close, and then this volume you see here is called the body of the candle. Okay, this is the body of the candle. For the green candle, the open is often down here, the low, the high over here, and then the close above here, and then this green volume you see here is the body of the candle. These are the bodies of the candle. Now we want to see this body and this wick trade into this other one, and then this body and this wick over here trade into this other candle. So you see that price is efficiently delivered here. There's no gap here. Okay, there's no gap. So candle 1, 2 and 3, they close each other efficiently. Now let's look at the other side. Candle 1, 2 and 3 also should close each other efficiently, where this wick should trade into this candle and this other wick should also trade into this candle. I hope you get it. So in a situation where these wicks do not trade into each other's body, we are going to have what we call a fair value gap, and I'm going to show you that as we progress. Now, let us look at how a fair value gap is formed. Let's assume that this other candle, like this, permit me to do this. This is how a fair value gap is formed for the bearish fair value gap. This wick should be down here and this other wick should be above here. Now notice the difference. I'm going to show you. Just stay put with me. I'm going to show you what a fair value gap is, and we are going to go to the chart and we'll see how we can identify a fair value gap. Let's remove this wick and let's remove this wick. We are going to come back to the code. Now, if you study this, you are going to realize that something is happening here. Look at this candle's low and look at this candle's high. You will realize that in between them there's a small gap. This gap simply means that the low of this candle did not trade completely into this other candle, okay, and the low of this candle also did not trade completely into this candle. So when you take the high of this other candle, and the low of the candle above, you realize that they did not intersect with each other. Under normal circumstances, they are supposed to intersect with each other, okay, to close up. But in a scenario where they fail to close up, you are going to have a gap in between them called a fair value gap. Why is it called a fair value gap? It is called a fair value gap because fair value price has not been delivered into that area, and IPTA is always going to refer back to that area to deliver fair value price. I hope you get it. So that is a fair value gap. Now let us look at this other scenario. Look at this other candle, the candle's high, and this other candle's low over here. if you look in between them, you are going to also realize that what the candles did not close up with each other, which means they left a gap in between them. And what is this gap called? This gap is called a fair value gap. Why is it a fair value gap? Because efficient price was not offered into these areas. So it is an area of inefficient price delivery. And what is the significance of this? The significance is that IPTA is always going to refer back to these areas to deliver price or to offer fair value price before continuing in its normal direction. We are going to look at how these things affect the market as we progress. So I hope you understand what a fair value gap is. It should be in between three candlestick price action. Now, they have different forms of fair value gaps. We have the inversion fair value gap, we have the reclaimed fair value gap, okay, and we are going to pay attention maybe only to the inversion fair value gap. We also have what we call the implied fair value gap. Maybe in the next lesson I am going to do a detailed video on the implied fair value gap, but I'm just going to highlight what an inversion fair value gap is and how it works in smart money concept. Under normal circumstances, if we are in a sell, okay, the market is selling and a fair value gap forms above, we are anticipating that IPTA is going to take price back into that fair value gap, fill it up, and then continue to move downward. That is how a fair value gap operates. So when you see a fair value gap, always mark it out, because IPTA will always refer back. IPTA will retrace into that fair value gap and offer fair value price, because it is deficient of what? Fair value price. Then when it offers fair value price, which is buy side, it is going to continue in its normal direction. Likewise, when you are in a buy market and you see a fair value gap form, it is likely that IPTA will reprice into that fair value level, or that fair value price, offer into that fair value gap, offer fair value price, and then continue its normal direction or its normal course. This is how we trade fair value gaps, okay? Now, in a scenario where we are anticipating that IPTA will trade into a bearish fair value gap, this is a bearish fair value gap, and then reprice, but then IPTA trades above that fair value gap, fails to trade below, or fail to hold. Anytime IPTA reprices back into that gap again, it's going to act as what? A support level, and we are going to see price go higher. This is when we mention it, or we call it an inversion fair value gap, because it inverts its role, okay? It tends to reverse its role. I hope you get it. This is an inversion fair value gap. Now let us look at the bullish scenario. If you are also anticipating that IPTA will trade back into this fair value gap and offer fair value price, but unfortunately IPTA trades below, if IPTA reprices back into this fair value gap, it's going to act as what? An inversion fair value gap, and you may see price continue lower. I hope you get it. Just to mention, anytime you see a fair value gap, always measure the fair value gap, okay? Measure the fair value gap like this. I am going to show you how to use the Fibonacci tool, do not worry. And you are going to pay attention to the midpoint of that fair value gap. And just to mention, the midpoint of a fair value gap is called a consequent encroachment, okay? Study the midpoint of every fair value gap. Always make sure you measure it, because IPTA uses it a lot, okay? It is called what? The consequent encroachment. Consequent encroachment, and we often abbreviate it as CE. CE means consequent encroachment. That is short form for CE is consequent encroachment. Okay, always pay attention to that. You see, IPTA will always trade to the midpoint of a fair value gap and use it as either a support or a resistance to continue price. I hope this is clear. You study this, okay? Now let's go to the chart and see if you can spot some examples there, and you see how IPTA treated those fair value gaps. Now let us look at this one. For example, this is the bullish fair value gap. You see this? Let me just mark it across. The low of this candle and the high of this candle. Look at what we just learned. This is the bullish fair value gap. Look at something. Now look at how IPTA traded back into this fair value gap. You see, with this tail, just with this tail, IPTA reached into this fair value gap, the midpoint of this fair value gap, and then took off from there. So this is a bullish fair value gap where it was inefficient in price delivery. So IPTA has to reprice into those areas to offer valuable price. Okay, valuable price has been added here, and when it is done doing that, it is going to continue in its normal course. Now you measure the fair value gap like this, and you take the midpoint. Look at how IPTA hits the midpoint of this fair value gap and then took off immediately. You see, that is a bullish fair value gap, and the midpoint of a bullish fair value gap or a fair value gap in general is called the consequent encroachment, C. Okay, now we still have a fair value gap here. The fair value gap is here, but IPTA has not yet traded into it. This is a fair value gap. So in future, you will see IPTA will reprice into this bullish fair value gap and trade. Okay, just study it. We are going to look at it as we progress in our mentorship. Don't worry. Now let us go again and look at various fair value gaps, how you can identify it, even a bearish fair value gap. Look here. This is a fair value gap here. This is a bearish fair value gap. This one here. In future, you will see IPTA will trade back into this area, okay, to offer fair value price into this area where fair value price has not been offered here, okay, into this gap. This is a fair value gap, okay, a bearish fair value gap. We are going to study this and we are going to pay attention to it. Now, if you study this level here, this level, you will realize that this is a balanced price action here. You see this candle straight here, this candle straight here. Here, price is efficiently delivered. You see how the candles close up together. This level, there's no gap here. All of these candles have closed up together. You see the wick straight above this one, the tail straight below this one, the wick straight above this candle, this other tail straight below this candle. So this is a balanced price action here. There is no gap here. But in a situation where you don't see that happen, it forms a fair value gap. I hope you get it, which is also what? An area of inefficient price delivery. Just to mention that a fair value gap is also, a bearish fair value gap is also a CB, a sell side imbalance, buy side inefficiency. And a bullish fair value gap is a BC, a buy side imbalance and a sell side inefficiency. You may have to listen to that again. Now, look at this level also. This right here is a fair value gap. The low of this candle and the high of this other green candle here. And just to mention also that the color doesn't matter, okay, the color doesn't matter. You see this one, this is a fair value gap here, okay, the low of this red candle and the high of this green candle, that forms a fair value gap. Now you see how price traded back into this fair value gap, offered valuable price and then sold off. This is a fair value gap here, this one here. It's a fair value gap, okay, that's a fair value gap. I hope you get it. So we can go on and you are going to see a plethora of examples on the chart. So you can still maneuver through different time frames. You are going to see a lot of them form and you see how price traded into them and then took off. Now look at this one here, the low of this candle and the high of this other red candle here. It's a fair value gap. That's a bullish fair value gap. You see, IPTA created this imbalance, traded back into this imbalance, filled it up, and then took off aggressively. See, this is a fair value gap here. Look at how IPTA came back and filled it up, then continued its normal course above. I hope you get it. That's a fair value gap. You can see a lot of them from here to here also. It's a fair value gap. Okay, this is a fair value gap here. You see how IPTA traded back, filled this gap here, and then took off as well. If you also look down here, you are going to see what? A bullish fair value gap. The low of this candle and the high of this other candle. See, fair value gaps are very, very, very powerful institutional reference point. If you can only trade fair value gaps, you are going to make a lot of money in the foreign exchange market. This is a fair value gap here. This is a fair value gap. See how we traded into it, filled it up, and then pushed higher. So if you see things like this, how can you tell somebody that price is being controlled by pressure? There's buying and selling pressure. No, these things can only be done by artificial intelligence. Okay, these things are very, very accurate. It cannot be done by buying and selling pressure, to be honest. Look at this one also. This is a bullish fair value gap here. This is a bullish fair value gap. This one here, you see, it's a bullish fair value gap. And the fair value gap also can be divided into 4 quarters. Okay, you have the midpoint, the upper quadrant, the lower quadrant, okay? And if you are bullish, the upper quadrant and the midpoint or the consequent encroachment are very sensitive areas. And if you are bearish, the lower quadrant and the consequent encroachments are very, very sensitive areas. I know you may not understand that, but don't worry. In future, I will explain that further. Look at this, the low of this candle and the high of this other red candle here. This is a bearish fair value gap. This one right here, this is a bearish fair value gap. You see how price traded into this fair value gap and then stayed below this fair value gap before it ever took off from there. See how many times price traded into this fair value gap here, how many times it traded here before and then sold off right down here. You see, that's the power of a fair value gap. Why? Because IPTA has to reprice into those areas to make sure that price is efficiently delivered before it can continue in its normal course. Okay, because the market has to be efficient. Anywhere there is inefficiency, IPTA will always reprice to those areas to make sure that there's efficiency. Okay, efficiently, to make sure that price is efficiently delivered. Okay. Sometimes those gaps will not be completely filled. That's why we have also breakaway gaps. We have measuring gaps and all the like. We are going to study that. I will do separate videos on that in future. But for now, let's just focus on the fair value gaps. Okay, bullish and bearish fair value gaps. Let's look at another example and then I will end this one. You can go to your chart and you see if you can practice. You see, this is a fair value gap here. This is a fair value gap here. Okay, the high of this candle and the low of this other green candle over here forms a fair value gap. You see, look at how IPTA had to trade back into it and then traded into this fair value gap multiple times. Why? Because they are making sure that they balance up this price before they leave. They don't want to leave any imbalance behind. Okay, IPTA has to do its job by balancing price before going to the next direction. I hope you get the point. So anytime price is leaving a certain area, ask yourself, why is price leaving this area? Or why is price coming back to this area? Is IPTA coming back to this area to offer fair value price? Is it coming back to fill a fair value gap? Is it coming back to fill a liquidity void? Is it coming back to trade into a breaker block or an order block or a mitigation block? IPTA is always going in for something. It is always running out for something. Okay, see this fair value gap. Look at how we trade above here, the upper quadrant of that fair value gap, and we took off. Like I said, gaps don't have to be filled completely. Sometimes IPTA has to leave some gaps empty. That is very, very normal. Okay, that's very normal. Now look at the inversion fair value gap here. This is a bearish fair value gap, right? Now we are anticipating that when price trades into this fair value gap here, from down here, when it trades here, it should sell off. But see, price instead traded above here and then used the consequent encroachment of this fair value gap and took off. So this fair value gap now is acting as what? As inversion fair value gap, because it is reversing its role. Under normal circumstances, we want to see price sell off from here, trade into here, and then sell off. But contrarily, it trades above, comes back, picks up more orders, and then goes higher. So it is it has reversed its role. Okay, it has reversed its role. In this case, it acts as what? As a inversion fair value gap. I think we are going to do a lot of videos on this so that you can really understand what all of this means. I think I've taken so much time already. You see, look at the consequent encroachment of this fair value gap. See how price stays here and it never leaves. So consequent encroachment is so powerful. You see what I'm saying, right? The midpoint of a fair value gap is so sensitive. So sensitive. You always make sure that you name it and you pay attention to it. Now, just to mention, you can see fair value gaps on different time frames. Okay, it doesn't only have to be on a particular time frame. Price action is fractal. When I say it's fractal, it means things that are formed on a lower time frame can also be formed on a higher time frame. The same things that happen on a higher time frame, they happen on a lower time frame. This is the 1 hour time frame. It's only going to look different, but it means the same thing. Okay. Now look at the 1 hour fair value gap here. This even shows very well. If you study this one, study the high of this candle here, the low of that candle, and the high of this candle, this 1 hour fair value gap. So you can have fair value gaps on a 1 hour, you can have on a daily, you can have on a 15 minutes, you can have on a 1 minute. You see, look at how it fills it up. Okay, it fills it up, hits the consequent encroachment of this fair value gap, and then takes off from there. So you can see a plethora of examples. This is another one here, the low of that candle and the high of this candle. See how it trades back into it, offers fair value price, and then takes off from here. You see what I'm saying? See, it takes off and it never came down below that fair value gap. So thank you so much for watching. You can go ahead and practice. Look at this one again, this fair value gap here, the low of this candle and the high of this other small candle here. You see this one? Maybe I did this one already. You see this one? Look at how it traded back into it and offered fair value price here. Okay, so this is a balanced price range. There is no imbalance, there is no inefficiency. Price has been efficiently delivered, so it has to seek the opposing liquidity. That's how IPTA operates. It's always looking to fill areas of inefficient price delivery, or it is looking to run out on liquidity, buy side liquidity or sell side liquidity. That's the only thing that IPTA does. Okay, that's the only thing IPTA does. So take our time and see how you can practice this, and then we are always going to meet in class. Thank you so very much, and thank you.